Welcome. This series is about Jyotish, which is Vedic astrology, and its relation to yoga, and particularly the actual practice of yoga to advance with the ultimate goal of improving or increasing our awareness of self and others. So to start with, in any kind of yoga practice, the idea is to remember the guru or the spiritual teacher first, and particularly when we're teaching. Om Guruve Namah. Om Guruve Namah. Om Guruve Namah. That's the idea, is the guru. Guruve means to the guru. The ma means hello, means I salute you. And it's remembering the spiritual mentor. And that's an important part of a yoga practice. And I'm sure if you're doing yoga already yourself, that's what you do in class or at home in your own practice. So I'm going to actually just show you a picture of Saraswati here, who is in Hindu tradition is the goddess of learning and education, and she's very commonly invoked when there's ever any kind of transmission of teaching for her blessing. So here we see Saraswati. And now I will be quiet for just a couple of seconds. And in your own tradition, however you do it, why don't you ask your own teachers for a little bit of guidance? Because this is a long journey. I mean, we're just starting now. This is actually the beginning. But the intent here is to actually walk through the whole way of what you do, how you actually proceed and succeed on the spiritual path. So I'll be quiet and or if you can have a cup of tea or something, but we'll just be quiet for a couple of seconds here. May I awaken to love. May I awaken. May I awaken to love. To love. To love. Okay, well, so let's get started. Just to kick it off, let's have a quote here. Here you see Mr. Mark Twain. His actual name was Samuel Clemens, and as you probably know, he's a famous American author, and had a great sense of humor. One of his quotes goes this way: "I've lived a long life and lived many years, and I've seen a lot of troubles, most of which never happened." Which is an awesome quote. It gets to the essence. It's like Mr. Clemens was switched on to what this teaching that we'll be sharing is all about. It's like, we can spend most of our life in our head, in our thoughts, in our worries, in our projections and desires, all that stuff. Or we can kind of be in the moment and let the moment unfold. Let it basically, like weather, like the breeze, kind of push us through and help navigate us. So instead of worrying about things, spending all my life worrying about things, it's just actually meeting the reality. And then very often it's different. Even, could be worse, could be better, but it's always different. So it's much better to keep your nose to the ground and find out what happens. So thank you, Mr. Clemens. Actually, he's a really interesting character. I just want to share this with you. This is towards the end of his life. He was like in the 1800s, and he died in the early 1900s. But what's interesting here is this is a quote, and you can check this on Wikipedia if you're interested. He was actually born 2 weeks after Halley's Comet had actually made its closest pass to the Earth, and it only does that every so often. And the quote goes, "I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It's coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it. It will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with the comet. The Almighty has said, no doubt, Now, here are these two unaccountable freaks. They came in together and they must go out together. What's amazing, what's actually wild, is that his prediction was very accurate. He actually died the day after Halley's Comet made its closest path to the Earth. So it's like somehow he was in tune with things. Even Tao himself, personally, if you're familiar with any of his writings and stuff, was very much, in terms of like a yogic perspective, more on the surface. He had a lot of criticism for, say, established religion, and he had, varying opinions about what was proper, behavior, social relationship. But he basically, at the end of his life, he actually started to toy around with the idea that maybe on the surface of it. And his actual last book that he wrote was this, you may not know about this one, it was called The Mysterious Stranger. And it actually just like the last few years before he passed, he had been working on it for like 6, 8, 10 years. Anyway, there were 3 versions of this thing, and they're all about basically mystical, magical stuff, which, most of his writings can occasionally have twinges of that kind of thing, but this was like full blown. It was almost like Fantasia, 80 or 100 years early. It was just like almost like a psychedelic trip. The idea is that an angel came down and basically interacted with people and showed them how dreamlike life actually is. So not only is the dream when we sleep kind of can have really amazing dreams, but the idea is that life itself is like a dream. And so that's what he was toying around with at the end of his life, was that maybe there's more to this than meets the eye. He was actually talking about the difference between a waking self and a dream self. And this the Mysterious Stranger story, basically the very ending, the last chapter, which is just a few paragraphs actually itself, but it's very powerful. It's just like he kind of slam dunks God in reality and just says it's all a bluff, it's just a dream. And there is some truth to what he actually writes. The thing is, that was as far as he could take it himself, because that was the limit of his personal experience. So at that stage, he was still just speculating. It's like, well, there's something about this. It's like there's more than meets the eye. And he got that right. But the next step is to actually do something about it. And that's what's called the spiritual journey. And that's what we're going to talk about here for the rest of this series. Different traditions throughout time have all taken this journey about finding out what's more than just on the surface, just like the dream self. More than just this waking dream is what they call life often. In the East, in Asia, the people who have done the best job of this are called yogis. And, I'm sure you've heard the word yoga by now. It's like one of the most popular things throughout the Western world. Practicing yoga as a form of physical education, having a healthy body is very popular. It's taken the world by storm. So, but the actual total practice of yoga is not just to be healthy, but it's to actually evolve. So you have a healthy body, but then you have a healthy heart, and then you have a healthy mind, and you basically evolve in what's called towards a spiritual dimension. And in Asia, there are basically 3 main types of yoga. There's one yoga, which the most popular and the most well-known here in the West comes from India, or the Hindu religion. That's a version of yoga. Those are the swamis and things like that. But there's also Tibetan Buddhism. That's actually a yoga. It's a Buddhist yoga. Those are the lamas, those folks. And that's another genuine tradition. And there's the third one, which is even less well known, which is called Taoism, and that comes from China. And the people who actually do the practice, not just the religious stuff, but who actually practice what the beliefs are for Taoism are basically yogis. So I'll be calling them Taoist yogis. So we have basically 3 flavors: Hindu, Tibetan, and Chinese. And they all have played a major part in the evolution of this world, and they all have very, very important things to say. And this series will basically explore bit by bit, piece by piece, step by step, how it all fits together. The thing is that they're all saying things in slightly different ethnic cultures, and so it sounds as if they're saying different things, or it sounds as if they're saying the same thing, and in fact, sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. So the idea is to try and tease this all out and figure out how to make the best of it. So here we go. So the first thing is to think about Jyotish. Jyotish is the word for what's called Vedic astrology. It's a Hindu word. It's actually Sanskrit, which is like the language that they use in India, but back in the old days. The modern version of Sanskrit is called Hindi. That's what the Hindu folks speak. But it's very similar to Sanskrit. So Jyotish itself is a word that basically means studying the light or the stars. So Jyotish is something like astrology, what we know in the West as astrology. But the key idea here to get is that there's astrology and then there's astrology. And the Jyotish, well, I'm going to call it Jyotish because that's the Indian word. So here we go. A yogi is basically interested in evolving, becoming better, especially what's called spiritually. So that means that you can actually alter your awareness to be aware of more subtle, more holistic, have a more grounded and a healthier perception of life. So that's the goal of what's called a yogi. And there are a lot of yogis here now in the West as well as over in Asia. And so the idea is that we all start down here on the earth, and we call the earth mother, just to get the sense that the earth is it's actually a living energy, and it deserves our respect. And actually part of the practice is learning to harmonize with the energy from the earth itself. The goal of yoga, though, the traditional teachings, say in Hindu or Tibetan or Taoist, is that you do practice, you do certain exercises and things, you train the mind, and you eventually get access to a much better or clearer vision of reality of what's actually going on. So we're calling that the sky father. It's like the heavens. So in Christian tradition, it would be, or any like Judaism or something, it's like going to heaven, something like that. So the model we're using is basically from the Hindu tradition. So it's like I'm not making any of this stuff up. It's been around for hundreds, thousands, or even longer, many, many years, and there's plenty of documented material to actually, if you want to dig further. So the idea is that the yogi, which is what we're all about here, yoga is the actual practice. Yogi is a person who practices, is trying to evolve. Yoga itself actually means, it comes from another Sanskrit word, which means to yoke. And the yoke is like, the ox with the yoke thing, pulling the plow. To yoke the mind, a person's mind, to spirit. That's what yoga is about. So a yogi is someone who is doing that, either in large measure or small measure, but anyone who's practicing yoga is doing some part of that journey towards the sky father. Yeah? So the idea is to be in harmony the whole way through, not to just wait until you get there. So it's not like pie in the sky. It's like you try and be as happy and healthy and cheerful and helpful as you can be wherever you are along the path. But there is a path. That's the whole point. So that's what we're calling the path to light, L-I-G-H-T, capital L, which means spirit or heaven, that type of thing. In the Hindu tradition, they talk about lokas. So it's like they give some structure to the whole thing. And there are 7 lokas. A loka basically is a plane of existence. So ordinary life is down here on the physical plane. So that's a loka. And then there are other lokas. The most common are the first three, the physical and what's called the astral and the mental, those three. And it goes further and further. It goes way up into the stratosphere. So, but we're going to start at the beginning, down on the physical, and work our way slowly forward. And you're invited to tune in or tune out as much as you want. But we're going to just step by step go the whole way up here until we get up through the astral, and we'll go up even into the mental plane. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun. So it just depends on what you're interested in. So the key here, though, is that Jyotish, most people think that it's something to do with planets and stars, like astrology. And they think, well, that's a bunch of, rubbish. It's a bunch of junk. In the West, if you talk to most educated people in the West, they'd laugh, or giggle, or, just kind of ho, ho, ho. Turns out that Jyotish is actually, there is some, fluff to it, but it's actually, because of where it came from, historically it came from people, yogis, real yogis who were upstairs, who had awareness of the higher realms. They're the ones who provided the basic ideas for Jyotish. And basically, in terms of a modern model for life, they basically understood basic physical processes. These days we look to, chemists and physicists to understand how it all works, but those folks experienced it. So it's like they experienced quantum physical and macroscopic, galactic level, different dynamics. And they just gave it some words. And so this symbol, it's actually called an analog model. The symbol for how nature actually works is called Jyotish. It's the Indian version of astrology. But astrology just means the study of the stars. But the stars themselves, the planets, the stars, all that stuff, that actually corresponds to something in yoga. This is the key idea you should get. This is the key teaching here for this piece today. There's something called the tattvas. If you're an actual yoga person, you know what a tattva is. It's the elements. And in yoga, they talk about the earth element, the water element, fire element, the wind element, and there's even higher, the etheric element, and there are higher. Basically, the elements correspond. It's the yoga version of the lokas. It corresponds to evolving dynamics, physical dynamics. It's not mere poetry. This is what you need to understand. It's actually real. It's just science hasn't quite caught up to the plot yet, because it's all cultural baggage. It's hard to understand that there's actually something there unless you experience it. But in yoga, a big part of the process is the yogi starts down in the physical world and is trying to take the yogi's mind, her mind, or his mind up to the sky, up to the higher levels. To do that, the yogi has to go through these dynamics. It's just like energy. It's just, it's like a busy street. You're trying to drive through midtown traffic at peak rush hour, and it's stop and go and here and there and all that. That's the tattvas. It's energy, and it either helps you or hinders you. And that's what the yogi has to deal with. So, and traditionally, the yogis are taught certain things to do, and they try and do them, and some succeed, and most of them don't. And the reason most of them don't is because this field of the energy or the elements is very complicated and tricky. That's where Jyotish comes in. It's like it's an actual model for that field. And if you learn a little bit about Jyotish, you can actually learn to avoid that traffic jam, or maybe catch that freeway and you go a little faster. That's the idea. So Jyotish, it's not just a model about, naming your kid or figuring out when you should invest some money or when should I get married, that kind of thing. It's a model for energy. It's a model for what are called the tattvas, the 5 elements in yoga. And it helps you understand how to do yoga, how to practice yoga. So it's not just a model. In Indian culture, and for most astrologies, Western astrology, there's Tibetan astrology, there's Chinese astrology, there's astrology everywhere. Most of it's just used to deal with day-to-day life, and there's a place for that. But what we're doing here is we're not doing any of that. We just need to know enough of this Jyotish stuff to help us get through the tattvas, to get up to the Sky Father, and to be in harmony with the Earth Mother, the Sky Father, and everything in between. So I hope you get that idea. That's the whole point of this entire series, is to learn just enough Jyotish to figure out how to deal with the tattvas, and then to actually apply yoga practice, which is from three traditions, from the Hindu tradition, the Tibetan tradition, and the Taoist tradition, to help us progress. And along the way, you'll learn there's a gazillion things to learn. It's most of it's useful, but again, you just should pick and choose, take whatever's useful for you. If it doesn't make sense, or you kind of have a doubt about it, just toss it. Maybe it's useful later, maybe not at all. I assume, that if you're listening to this, you have an interest. It's that, which means either you're practicing already, you have a spiritual teacher, or, some affiliation with something, and you have what's called, in Buddhist, it's called the Sangha. You have other people who are on the path. That's really important. I'll be providing you information, and again, this is meant to be eclectic. That means a little bit from all over the places. I'm just going to share with you what I've been taught by my teachers and what they've sanctioned me to teach you. But you're in the end, it's your story, it's your karma. Karma means it's just like your journey through life, and you can. So the idea here with this series is we'll be talking a little bit of theory, but the idea is we want to be short on the theory and long on the practice. But today, at least, we had to get some groundwork out of the way. But each time we'll talk a little bit about ideas, and then we'll talk about how it can be applied. There's a lot. So for today, the first thing is, if you haven't already done so, you should get what's called a Vedic astrology chart. You can get this for free on the web. There are various websites that'll just, you just type in your birth details and it'll just print it out for you. You should have that at least, because I will be talking about some details, not a lot. I'm not trying to teach a Jyotish course here, but some of the ideas you're going to have to know just so you can understand how to apply it for yoga. So the first step is just get a chart. If you get a reading, if you've already had a reading, all the better. If it's like you're an astrology person, even better. So I encourage you to do that. That way, at least you have a reference, and I'll be explaining it from the ground up, all this stuff. So if you know nothing about Jyotish, you'll know enough to be helpful as you progress. So one, make sure you have a Jyotish chart. So when I start to talk about, say, the ascendant, you can say, well, this is mine, so you know which one yours is, that type of thing. That's the first. The second, there are already some videos posted in this series about Qigong. Qi is energy. It's the Taoist version of energy, like prana is called prana. In Hindu, in Tibetan, it's called lung, or the wind. It's just it's energy, electricity, and it becomes more subtle electricity, becomes quantum energy eventually. You should start to learn about Qi. So the very first step is just to do a physical practice like Hatha Yoga, or like a martial art, an internal martial art like Bhagavad Gita or Tai Chi. Or there's Xingyi. There are some Chinese martial arts. You can look that up. Internal martial art. That's important because those will give you grounding and learning how to work with Qi. Barring that, you can just look videos on YouTube. There are bound to be classes in your part of the world about how do you work with Qi, but that should be added into what you're doing. So my recommendation here is, one is get a chart. Two is see if you can start doing a Qi practice for 5 or 10 minutes. And ideally, if you're doing a physical activity, whatever it is, running or yoga or Tai Chi or something, at the end, add the 5 or 10 minutes in, if you have the time. Otherwise, find some time in the day, but practice for 5 minutes, minimum 5 minutes. I will give you some further guidelines as we go along about how to do this, because the idea here is I'm going to teach you how to actually use that chi in your yoga practice. So it's like you're holding a pose, say triangle pose or something, and you can learn to run the chi or the prana at the same time. And eventually, that's the beginning. That's like superficial on the outside. Then later stages, you can run it on the inside. That's you're probably familiar with like Kundalini yoga or Kriya yoga, or those are later stages of the Tibetan practice, the Taoist practice, that type of thing. That's all one step at a time. So that's it for today. It's been a pleasure. I hope you have a wonderful day, evening, whatever it is, wherever.
Govinda Bolo Sham.